Thank you for joining me. I look forward to sharing my passion for carved stone. I'm Walter Arnold, and I'm a sculptor and a stone carver. I work with limestone and marble to create a wide range of sculptural and architectural works. Our oldest records of civilization come to us through carvings. This art has been with us throughout our history, adapting and adjusting to fit with different times and cultures while retaining its historic foundations. I have been creating art all my life. Here I am at the age of 8, exhibiting at an art fair. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, visiting the Art Institute and walking around the city looking at details on buildings, like this dragon at the University of Chicago. By the time I was 13, I knew that this was what I wanted to do. But I was repeatedly told that it was a dead art, and no one did it, and no one wanted it anymore. I didn't know if it was possible, but after growing up around fantastic works like these, I was determined to try. 100 years ago, there were over 100 stone mills in the Chicago area, each employing many carvers and stone cutters, and countless others worked throughout the country. They left us a fantastic legacy of beauty and creativity, but all too much of it has been ignored, overlooked, abandoned, and tossed away. However, if you look up, you'll find surprises in older sections of towns and cities across America. I spent my teenage years trying to figure out how to carve, collecting blocks of stone from the rubble of torn-down buildings and sculpting portrait busts of my friends and family. But I realized I was trying to reinvent the wheel. I needed to find people who knew the proper techniques and traditional methods, the skills that people had spent countless generations developing, and learn from them. I learned that among the small handful of good carvers still working in the U.S. were those working on the National Cathedral in Washington. And when I was 16, I hitchhiked there to try to get a job. Not surprisingly, the taciturn old Italian carvers had no interest in taking on a young, long-haired kid with torn jeans. I kept looking and learned of the town of Pietrasanta near the marble quarries of Carrara, Italy, a town where the main business was the production of artwork. Marble was everywhere. At the time, there were still many traditional carving studios there, but now only a handful remain. I moved there when I was 20 years old to learn to carve in the traditional method. That's me working in the bottom picture. And I worked in this studio with men like Luigi Marchetti, whom you see in the upper right photo. Traditionally, there has been a separation between sculptors and carvers. Sculptors were the artists who came up with the designs, prepared drawings and models. These were then turned over to highly skilled artisans, the carvers, to translate into stone. It is a division of skills analogous to the collaboration of composers and performing musicians in the music world. I spent several years there learning to carve portrait busts, religious statuary, and other work, including these pieces. The Italian carvers taught me the skills to work in any style, giving me a very diverse artistic and technical vocabulary, and giving me the ability to spend my life doing a wide range of different work. After several years in Italy, I returned to the United States. I again visited the National Cathedral in Washington And after my training in Italy, I was fortunate enough to be hired. I spent 5 years there working under master carver Vincent Palumbo, a fifth-generation carver from Italy, and alongside Patrick Plunkett, who had trained in England and worked on Salisbury, Chichester, and Wells cathedrals. That's Vincent in the middle and Patrick on the right. Patrick brought along the English stoneworking tradition, different from the Italian tradition I had been steeped in, and working with him gave me a broader vocabulary of skills. By the way, after leaving the cathedral, Patrick was in charge of stone restoration on the White House. I find this somewhat amusing, because damage to that building began with the War of 1812 when the Brits burned it. I think that might have been part of a long-term British employment program. Patrick's brother was the head of restoration and maintenance on Windsor Castle in England, and so if they have the third brother, I'm sure he'd have been working either on the Kremlin or the Great Wall of China. I was part of the team working under Vincent Palumbo to carve sculptor Frederick Hart's Ex Nihilo, the Creation, over the front entrance of the cathedral. We used the same measuring techniques I had learned in Italy, precisely reproducing the sculptor's plaster model. This sculpture is about 21 feet wide and 16 feet high, and we worked in place, carving it directly into the face of the building. I also carved a wide range of other work on the cathedral, including ornate decorative works such as these. Despite all the deep undercutting and complexity that you see, everything drains down. There is nowhere for water to puddle and collect, or else it would freeze and could pop off some of the carving. I also carved 36 gargoyles and grotesques for the cathedral. In medieval times, the gargoyles and grotesques gave carvers the opportunity to represent and caricature the life they saw around them. With the work we did on the cathedral, we continued that tradition, using these carvings as a place to observe and comment on our culture. Here you see me carving a crooked politician who is tilting the scales of justice. And on the right is a series of grotesque animals. Gargoyle is the generic term we use for all of these works, but technically the term gargoyle means a water spout or a drain. It comes from the same root as the word gargle, both coming from the Latin word for throat, gula. A grotesque is any fantastic carving that doesn't serve as a water spout. The crooked politician is a true gargoyle. You see the drain pipe coming through his head. After 5 years in Washington, it was time to return to Chicago and establish my studio here. These are a few of my grotesques. While my architectural work needs to be very precise with every detail planned out, these grotesques are more improvisational, an opportunity to play with the skills and explore the stone. And how could this green man not be cheerful when he has a good book and 2 cups of coffee? Here is a gargoyle in action, funneling rainwater away from a building. If you look closely, you'll see a bird in its mouth taking shelter from the rain. Stone is durable and is a natural medium for memorials, and I have been entrusted with creating quite a few memorials and tombstones. Among these are my tree stump tombstones. Tree stump tombstones were very popular in the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and you can encounter them when you visit older cemeteries. I love the form and have been fortunate to be able to carve a number of these trees. They are a wonderful genre that allows for personalization, individuality, and creativity. This double tree is installed at Chicago's Bohemian National Cemetery. There you can find the largest collection of tree stump tombstones of any cemetery. But this was the first new one installed in over 70 years. The details on this double tree tell the story of the couple and their life together. He was a Cubs fan, and his Cubs hat and radio are on a branch. Her pet cat eyes a pair of lovebirds, symbolizing their lifelong love together. Stone fireplaces have warmed our homes for eons. When I create my unique fireplaces, I view them as sculptures built into a home, center points to the room where people will gather. Fountains and water features are another traditional application for complex stonework. My large fountain on the left is in a garden of a mansion on Chicago's Gold Coast at Erie and Wabash. The niche fountain, one of a pair, grace the entry gates of a beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin estate. And of course, stone naturally finds a home in gardens and parks. So, how does a carver get from concept to finished work? The process usually begins with drawings, and sometimes we work directly from the drawing to create the finished work, but other times models are necessary. These can be small sketch models called bozzetti, or they can be precise, full-sized models. Stone is a natural material cut from the earth from quarries that can go deep in the ground, as in the case of the Indiana limestone quarries, or from a mountain top, as with the Italian marble. The blocks are then split down to a manageable size, usually about 5 to 10 tons, and transported to a stone mill. A stone mill is like a sawmill for wood. It's a fabricating plant where the blocks are cut to size. They use a range of saws and other shaping machines, along with skilled handwork. I work with the mill, selecting the block grade and quality, and specifying exactly how I want it cut to size for my needs. Once I get the blocks from the mill, I carve them with a wide range of tools, mainly hand and small pneumatic hammers and chisels. The basic form of the cutting end of the chisel has changed little over the centuries, but the introduction of the pneumatic hammer in the late 1880s helped make the work faster and smoother. Green men, or foliate heads, span the border of reality and imagination of the scientific and the spiritual worlds. Here are my steps in carving a large green man about 30 inches tall. I started with a rectangular block of limestone that weighed 1,000 pounds. Working from drawings and referencing photos of historic pieces, I began rough shaping the stone, finding the proportions, the main masses, and the depths of the various parts of the face. After shaping all the major forms, I could begin carving the final surfaces and details. People think of sculpture as shape and form, but I'm really working with light and shadow because that is what you see when you look at it. I use sharper or softer edges, flat and curving surfaces, deep undercutting and texture to create contrast and bring the work to life. And here's the finished piece. Water shoots out of its mouth, so it is a gargoyle. And here it is in place with water cascading into a spa and then down to an infinity pool. Putting it all together, here is work in progress as I carved a griffin panel. Stonework incorporated in architecture can require very precise, complex geometry. Here, I started with measured shop drawings and then created 3D computer models to work out all the forms. From these, I made patterns and templates, which you can see on the upper right, sitting on my workbench, and then I systematically and precisely cut all the forms. This fireplace was made up of 18 pieces, all fitting very precisely. This is different for figurative sculpture. A few years ago, I was asked to create a monumental statue of Father Arnold for Loyola University of Chicago. After preparing quite a number of drawings, I made a small clay model of the figure along with full-size models of the head and hands. I then went to the quarries in Indiana and selected this 23,000-pound block of stone and had the stone mill in Indiana cut off the excess, getting it down to a much more manageable 10,000 pounds. I then brought that to my studio where, with the help from my grandson's precise critiques, I carved the work. Design, planning, and preparation took about 8 months, and my carving took another 10 months. The finished work weighs about 7,700 pounds, so 2/3 of the block was removed in the carving process. It is installed at the lakefront campus of Loyola University, Chicago. I hope I've inspired you to look up and discover the treats that the carvers of the past have left for us. And please follow me on Facebook and Instagram, where I post progress photos and videos as I'm creating new works in stone. As you see, I'm passionate about carving and about preserving the history and the magnificent carvings of my predecessors. Therefore, I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss the other aspect of what I do. When I first went to Italy, the carvers told me that I had to visit Genoa and go to the cemetery there, the Camposanto di Staglieno. It holds the greatest collection of mid-19th to mid-20th century Italian marble sculpture, thousands of works. Unfortunately, while the city of Genoa can maintain it as a working cemetery, they lack the funds and until the past couple of years the motivation to maintain it as a museum. But it is the largest outdoor museum in Europe. There are a dozen galleries like this filled with sculptures and countless more spread over 80 hilly, tree-covered acres. The galleries hold 750 monumental sculptures filling niches 16 feet tall and 10 feet wide, and another 750 smaller sculptures are set in the pilasters flanking those niches. In 1886, the Parisian newspaper Le Figaro announced that Staglieno was the most beautiful cemetery in the world. The English author Evelyn Waugh wrote in 1960 that if Père Lachaise and the Albert Memorial were obliterated, the loss would be negligible as long as this great repository survives. Carving drapery to actually look like cloth is extremely difficult. Think of all the modern sculptures you've seen where the drapery looks like stiff cardboard tubes. Imagine the skill and work required for these sculptures, not just to make the marble feel as soft as cloth, but to get the lace to follow the folds properly. The skill levels are simply mind-boggling. And this is the finest carved marble wing that I have ever seen. Heavy marble becomes as light as a feather under the carver's chisel. These sculptures from Staglieno are so alive, they look like you could sit and talk with them. The more I learn, the more Staglieno shows me how much more I can still learn. Just think, these are pieces of stone. The drapery is almost liquid in this 1912 memorial. This is a work that merges symbolism and Art Nouveau. Note the dreamlike figure floating in the sky behind this life-size statue of a young woman. Chrysanthemums symbolize her young life cut short. The work at Staglieno encompasses a full range of styles of art from the mid-19th to the mid-20th century, from neoclassicism, romanticism, and bourgeois realism through symbolism, liberty, which is the Italian flavor of Art Nouveau, and Art Deco. When I introduced my wife to Staglieno, she encouraged me to write my book, Staglieno, The Art of the Marble Carver. Once it was published, I received feedback from all who read it about the condition and the need for restoration. They all asked, why doesn't someone take care of this? And at first I did not have an answer. No one was doing anything. The leaking roof had caused the plaster to crumble and the bricks to fall from the ceiling and walls of this gallery. These years of neglect have put the sculptures at risk. A few years ago, a chunk of stone fell from the top of this wall, beheading one bust and breaking off part of the foot of the angel. To help preserve these works is my way of giving back to the carvers who inspired me. Therefore, we created American Friends of Italian Monumental Sculpture, AFIMS, a nonprofit organization that is working with the city of Genoa to support the restoration of these masterpieces and increase awareness of this amazing collection. I didn't know how much we could accomplish, but I knew we had to try. To date, we have been able to sponsor 15 completed restorations, and another is nearing completion. This is one that we restored, Leonardo Bistolfi's magnificent Bauer Memorial from 1902, a true Art Nouveau masterpiece. In 2013, we sponsored our first restorations, Lorenzo Arengo's sculptures of Benjamin Whitehead and his wife Julia Morrison Bentley, shown here before and after restoration. These two sculptures made a deep and lasting impression on me when I was 21 years old, but over my lifetime I've seen the degradation caused by weather, pollution, and neglect. It has been a real joy to see them come back to life. We caught them right at the point where the deterioration was starting to really accelerate. If AFIMS hadn't come along, by now significant amounts of detail would have been lost. Pollution eats away at marble, biological growth breaks down the surface, and humidity causes erosion. James Fletcher was the longest-serving U.S. consul in Genoa, serving from 1883 to his death in 1901, and serving under 4 different presidential administrations. His wife and 1 daughter both died during his time in Genoa, and he commissioned this memorial from the young sculptor Luigi Brizzolare. This helped launch Brizzolare's successful international career. His style blended Art Nouveau with realism, and he went on to produce numerous monuments in public sculpture in Italy, Brazil, and Argentina. Before restoration, the sculpture was being attacked by biological growth. Bacteria, mildew, and lichen was breaking down the surface of the marble. The cross and one wingtip were broken, and poor drainage meant the base got soaked every time it rained. We sponsored restoration of one of the best-known and beloved sculptures at Staglieno, the 1881 monument to Caterina Campodonica, the hazelnut vendor. A poor single woman, she had been married briefly in her youth, but her husband was an alcoholic who abused her. She dumped him, and from then on survived as a street vendor selling nuts and sweets at fairs and festivals. There was no safety net in those days, and she was at the bottom rung of society. But she worked and saved all her life, and when she was in her 70s, she commissioned one of the most respected and celebrated artists of the time, Lorenzo Arengo, to sculpt her memorial. She wore her best clothing and modeled for him holding cakes and a string of hazelnuts. This sculpture is a demonstration of the democratization of Italian society in the late 1800s. While it remained a very structured and hierarchical society, for one of the first times in history, even the poorest could stand up with dignity and look even the most powerful and important citizens in the eye, taking pride in what they made of themselves, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. I've given you just a small taste of the abundance of treasures to be seen in Staglieno. There are more than a dozen galleries like this one, filled with artwork. I hope you'll agree with me that this is one of Italy's greatest hidden sculptural treasures, and perhaps I've inspired a few of you to visit this magical, wonderful cemetery. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this interesting and an inspiration. We have more photos and information on our website, afims.org, and many hundreds of photos on Facebook and Instagram. And remember to keep seeking out the beauty and creativity in our amazing world.